Hello and welcome to Experimenta Social. I'm Nicky Pastore, the exhibition and program producer here at Experimenta. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which I now work and live, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their elders past and present. We also encourage you to contribute your acknowledgement of country from where you're watching, as it would be great to hear from you. Please do so in the chat function below. Just some quick online housekeeping before we get started. Our speakers today will present for 20 minutes each, and you can submit your questions to the Q&A function and they'll be answered at the end of the event. If you're experiencing any tech issues, we're also streaming live via our YouTube channel, and it would be great to get your feedback at the end of the event via our audience survey that will be emailed to you. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce Experimenta Artistic Director, Jonathan Parsons.
Welcome everyone to Experimenta Social. We're about to hear from two artists whose practices explore the intertwined relationships between humans and other life forms. Their practices are both concerned with the complex interrelationships that play out in specific geographical locations. And more recently, Fiona and Dominic have become inspired by what microscopic views can tell us about a particular site. More broadly, they're interested in the ways that technological tools contribute to our understanding of ecosystems and tell the often hidden stories of diverse life forms within our environment. So first up, I'd like to introduce Fiona Hillary, who's an artist and curator who draws on visual performative and relational art practices. Her work asks us to consider who and what we are in the process of becoming. She recently curated Post-Human Publics at RMIT's Project Space. She's the program manager of the Master of Arts, Art in Public Space at RMIT University, and she's also a member of the Algae Society, a global collective of interdisciplinary researchers. So I'll hand it over to Fiona.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for that introduction. I'm going to start with a short film. With the trouble. As a situated, embodied, embedded subject, I'm interested in the multiplicity of readings of our times, creatively triggering ruptures in affect to generate some kind of resonance in an attempt to co-constitute spaces where affect shifts, constituting an encounter with sound, light, and the ambience of space. From a collectively immersive experience created as a meditation on site to a more intimate mode of immersion, created as a meditation on the broader environment. This project is framed by performative and relational modes of practice that draw on post-human inquiry and experimentation as method. Braidotti invites us with a call. Whatever increases your capacity to act and intervene in the world, intervene in the public sphere for the love of the world. I'm interested in a multiplicity of readings of our times and how we creatively explore the interstices. Inspired by Haraway, Braidotti, Alaimo, I locate my work in an affirmative cartography for the future. I am a practicing public artist. My interest in creative public practice is positioned between visual, performative, and relational practices. It lies in the capacity for creative public practice to explore how we vision the future and asks, what can public practice do to intervene in our rehearsal of the future? This presentation will introduce you to a flight line from a site on the western fringes of Melbourne, the Western Treatment Plant. It lies on the land of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I want to acknowledge their enduring history and that their sovereignty was never ceded. The Western Treatment Plant sprawls across 10,000 hectares of land. It produces 40 billion litres of recycled water every year. It is 130 years old and much of the site is not accessible to the general public. This multi-species landscape, in its co-opting for treatment of human faeces, expresses multiple impacts from colonisation to climate change. Where once a grassland may have existed, we have the impact of our own effluent. I am implicated in this landscape in so many ways, as is anyone here today whose sewage is pumped to the Western Treatment Plant for treatment. A portion of the site...
Okay, I found this on the web.
Sorry, that's technology intervening. Siri thought I was speaking to her. A portion of this site is world renowned for its bird life habitat. Twitchers, bird watchers, can apply for security passes to enter part of the site for bird watching purposes. It's an unusual space where the scars of sewage technology of the past are laid across the landscape. It is fenced and has heavy security. Once you're through the security checkpoint, the inside, the site, it's like a world of its own. Located in the Werribee Plain, a flat landscape bounded by the granite ridges of the You Yangs mountain range, the Lake Borry coastal wetlands, and the Werribee River. Cornfields, channels, crows, cows, occasional evidence of a wild, uncontrolled landscape, but mostly human impact has marked, scarred, and scored the site. Across this journey, I have been thinking about the Western Treatment Plant as a test site for creative practice. A test site allows for work to be considered as experimental and evolving, giving rise to unexpected moments and ultimately unexpected outcomes. I've been working with this notion of test sites of practice in the public realm for some time, both as an artist and curator. It has the capacity to reveal unexpected moments of a site through matter, an artist practice, and audience experiences. A test site is never fully finished. It's never a resolved work. It is an ongoing creative inquiry that dances with failure in this wild process of becoming. The first iteration of this test site was a site-specific work, 37 degrees, 57 minutes and 2.5 seconds south, 144 degrees, 38 minutes and 2 seconds east, named to forever locate it geographically. This work was part of Treatment Flight Lines, curated by Cameron Bishop with artistic director David Cross, as an investigative, creative project on site. This work revealed the potency of the generative, progressive nature of durational performance, creating and unfolding the intervals and interstices, recuperating spaces between the past and present on the edge of the future. The work unfolded the palpable nature of a haptic and sonic intervention, creating a rupture that is generative. This work took place in a blue stone water tower, one of few structures on the site that remains to mark the township of Cockrock. Drawing on aerial photography of the site, neon configurations were constructed from recycled lengths of neon, reflecting the purpose of the Western treatment plant in recycling our waste. Electric guitars and neon are both reliant on vibration and reverberation to make sound and to generate light, literal resonance. Through a durational electric guitar performance, a set list abstracted from a social media call-out, in a smoky, haze-filled space, like the sound outside, the neon glow floated in the void. The empty water tank amplified abstracted strains of PJ Harvey's We Float, the Night Rider theme, Gary Newman's Cars, and Helen Reddy's I Am Woman. The landscape was enveloped in sound. It could be heard for a kilometre across the site. An owly refrain that repeatedly filled the spaces in between, the spaces of becoming, a call and response between a human yearning and other non-human occupants of the site. The more recent line of flight builds on the reverberation of life that engages human and non-human, where our treated sewage flows back into the ocean, the shore of the Western treatment plant. This is a work in development. Resonance runs through my work both theoretically and haptically. The resonance of sound, the ambient atmosphere, the resonance of matter. They all rely on vibration. Vibration is at the core of all life. I'm exploring more deeply the human and non-human matter of the site. From the reverberations of the previous work, I'm considering naturally occurring reverberations along an inaccessible shoreline, 20 kilometres on the west coast of Port Phillip Bay. The Southern Hemisphere is currently experiencing unprecedented occurrences of algal drift. Appearing as red tides during the day, Noctiluca scintillans glow blue in the evening's crashing waves. Noctiluca scintillans live in the ocean. They are nomadic, non-motile. They rely on the wind and the tide to move. Their glow works on a circadian rhythm, a 24-hour clock. They have a flagellum that extends from their cell, scooping phytoplankton and nutrients and other algae from the food as water. They use carbon and emit oxygen and are often useful as a bioassay tool to detect pollutants in water. Algae contributes 90% of the world's oxygen. It gives us life. 3 significant blooms have occurred along the coast of Victoria throughout my research. I have travelled in the wee hours of the morning to Port Arlington, Lorne and Jan Juc. I've collected samples of recent blooms and learnt much about these critters that through an enzymatic process, luciferin becomes luciferase and creates a glow. As a guest in my house, I fed them with phytoplankton and light, thanks to the team at Biosciences at RMIT. I played Brian Eno to them for 12 hours a day and for 4 weeks. They glowed in the early hours of the morning. My family life changed and became focused on an unautomated grow light and the containers of Noctiluca on our washing machine. I travelled to San Diego to work with Michael Latz from Scripps Oceanography. Together we exposed dinoflagellates, Pyrocystis lanula in this case, to a series of garage band tracks, documenting the activation of their glow. Most recently, the bloom was offshore and waves were breaking along the reef. The Noctilucas were aglow in all their glory. The occasional splash of blue dances with our soggy sneakers in the water and sand. I take samples in the dark. I think this method of sampling is quite hit and miss. But the bulk of the bloom is too far out. It's too dark. A daytime recce would have helped to understand the beach before exploring it in low light. I'm lured by the siren-like organisms. The stars are so bright, a slight orange glow of lawn in the distance. It's like the dinoflagellates and the tide are playing with us, tempting us to go further out, then suddenly engulfing us. The hydrophone captures the sound of the shallow waves and the movement as they drag it across the sand and relocate it with each wave. When I return home, I listen to the dinoflagellates in their flask. I now hear their glow. Listening to the water in Port Phillip Bay, I hear a Chinese language radio program. I hear the industrial sounds of our urban harbour. I hear other than human life forms, zooplankton and small fish that occupy the shallows. I hear the water. Steve Mentz suggests the ocean is where human history can be told through multiple estrangements rather than progressive settlements. Perhaps we should plunge into uncertainty, movement and dissolution. He implores us in joining him in identifying currents of the present that flow into the future. From our situated location, an island in the middle of the Pacific, Southern and Indian Oceans, how do we relate to the ocean? How do we relate to each other? How do we interact with the elements around us to alter and transform our current trajectory? How do we share narratives of the ocean? Through awe and wonder of the blue glow of the nomadic algal drift on the crashing waves, my mind is cast to a flow of ideas, a flow of communication, the flow of the other than human that occupy the oceans. I'm taken by Haraway's notion of companion species. I'm considering Noctiluca scintillans as my companions. As a matter of care, riffing from Barad, I'm exploring different kinds of stories that invite different responses, all the time being attentive to the materiality of imagining. Through diffractive practice using relational performativity, I am interested in exploring our entanglements and our co-constituted spaces of being. I am diving into a transcorporeal experiment. I'm interested in interactivity, the making, marking of time, and what this offers us in reading and telling of our times, the human and non-human alike. I've spent many hours on the shores of the Western Treatment Plant. When the tide is far enough out, it's possible to walk along a narrow strip of sand, teetering on the edge of the shore on assemblages of seaweed, plastics, the occasional dead bird, revealing themselves through smell before sight. I'm reminded of Alaimo's description of the human conception of the ocean as so vast and powerful that anything dumped into it will be dispersed into oblivion, making it particularly difficult to capture, map, and publicise the flow of toxins across terrestrial, oceanic, and human habitats. Embracing new knowledges of human and non-human entanglements, I think through the conditions that give rise to algal blooms that glow and dance in the crashing waves. Treated human excrement, cruise ship effluent, the runoff of industry, pesticides carried through waterways flushed into the ocean. More recently, my mind is on the impact of fire retardants in our waterways, in life-saving attempts to protect human and non-human life from the wilds of fire seasons with ever increasing intensities. I propose that the siren-like glow of Noctiluca scintillans map a flow of toxins we can no longer ignore. Through my research, I am not tracing the world. Rather, I am exploring the traces of the world through repetition and refrain that allows us to stay in the moment. I stake a claim for the imagination, situated in the present, drawing on the past, and creatively resonating us into the future. I'd like to finish with this image, offering a still preview of a new work in development. After finding my companion species in bioluminescent dinoflagellates, with an incredible crew of humans, I've made a 360-degree film and sound piece to offer audiences an intimate encounter with my companion species. I'd like to acknowledge that my research to date has been supported by Michael Latz at Scripps Oceanography in San Diego, Gustav Hallegraf at the University of Tasmania, and Aidan Morodov and his team at RMIT Biosciences here in Bandura. The development of the work has been supported by Deakin University's Imaginarium and will be presented as part of their launch, the launch of their immersive screen and sound space. Aubrey Combin for helping with the filming, Fika Entertainment for helping with animation, and the fabulous Byron Dean for collaborating with me on the development of the sound. Thanks everyone for joining me. Jonathan, back to you.
Thanks so much, Fiona. Yeah, no, I'm back. And just before I introduce Dominic, to all of our attendees today listening to these talks, there will be an opportunity for people to ask questions at the end of the talk. So feel free as our speakers are speaking or at the conclusion of the formal presentations to just write your questions in the chat function and I'll moderate that after we've heard from Dominic. So now to introduce Dominic Redfern. He's a video artist whose practice is concerned with the entangled relationships between natural and social histories. He uses studies of plants, insects, microbes, and the human detritus to examine often overlooked elements of the environment that can tell us important things about how we are enmeshed within ecosystems. He has exhibited widely in both Australia and internationally, including the Havana Biennale, the Climate Festival, and Super Deluxe in Japan. So I'll hand it over to Dominic now, and please make him very welcome.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. I'll just adjust the exposure on this camera so you can see me a tiny bit better. Has that made any adjustment at all? Come on. There we go. That's a little bit better. Okay, so firstly, I speak to you today from the unceded lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung, Tawangarung and Wurundjeri peoples, part of the Federation of the Kulin Nation. And I acknowledge their elders, past, present and future, and their abiding custodianship of this country. Thanks very much to Experimenta for inviting me here. I'm so chuffed to be doing this with Fiona. Fiona's a great comrade of mine, in many senses, a dear friend, but someone with whom I identify with at so many levels. So I've picked out just a couple of works to look at today, as well as pulling together a preview of the work that I'll be presenting for the forthcoming Experimenta Triennale, Life Forms. So I suppose I'll just plunge in. Like Fiona, my work is realist. It takes its cue from the natural world as well. But the first work I'd like to look at today, it doesn't have anything to do with that. I've been doing my work around natural history for the last decade or so. And that actually came out of quite the opposite. Almost what would seem like the polar opposite. So if we could identify that as kind of landscape work, I like to think of the work I do now as a kind of a post-documentary practice. By post-documentary, I mean work that makes no claim to objective truth necessarily, though it shares this kind of evidentiary quality with documentary. It shares a regard for the natural world, but also acknowledges my own subjective place in shaping that work and my own position within the work. And it also, when I think about the genres of fine art, I think about landscape and also still life. Still life, in fact, more than landscape, probably shapes a lot of the work that I do, or the way that I think about the work that I make. But prior to that, between the year 2000 and probably around 2010, you know, it's pretty arbitrary. These things blended one into the other. What I did was I made all this me in it. And Jan Duffy, who was such a fantastic feature of the Melbourne art landscape for decades down at Lyndon, was a great supporter of mine. And she put me in a number of shows. She was someone who put me in shows as an emerging artist on for another, you know, kind of 15 years, right up until the very last big show that she did, sadly, down at Lyndon. And that was Oddity. And it's something I thought I'd like to show you today. The work I made for it was Tweets for the End of the World. So it was a work commissioned by Lyndon Gallery in St Kilda, for those of you who don't know, for the show Space Oddity. And it was sighted on a large public screen at the St Kilda Junction. And I made 7 10-second videos. And my work evoked a post-apocalyptic world in which a lone survivor travels with his shopping trolley, searching for food and shelter, and yet remains avidly attuned to the pithy one-liners uploaded to the Twitter hashtag Tweets for the End of the World. So my intention was in part to critique the dangers an obsession with the virtual world creates in the physical world. The project extended my previous work on large public screens. So I'd done stuff like this before, and it was site responsive and constructed to blend in with the other advertisements on the screen. And audiences were able to tweet to the hashtag and have their words inserted into the videos throughout the course of the show's run as well. I thought it was apt to show today because it uses text for a start. Just the work that I'm preparing for Life Forms is relies on text, has evolved to use text, but also because we have a very dangerous man in a seat, you know, it's possibly the most powerful man in the world at the moment, who relies heavily on Twitter, and he exercises it as a weapon. And also that this year feels, if not apocalyptic, then certainly so much seems to be at stake and in flux in this particular moment. So it seemed like an apt work to have a look at. Okay, so I'll just try to do a bit of screen sharing. Okay. And there we go. Okay, so you should be looking at it right now, but I'm just gonna check something. Sorry, folks, just let me check the volume so it doesn't blow your heads off with traffic noise, okay? Yes, it was just about to blow your heads off with traffic noise. Let's turn that way down there. Okay, flip back over to Zoom. Okay, there I am back again. Now we need to turn the exposure down on this silly camera. All right, so of course, face masks are popular this year as well. So it again seemed apt. The second work I'd like to show you, I really hope at my end that sounded terrible. So yeah, anyway, I hope that's going to be more important with the final work I show, but anyway, I guess that's Zoom for you. No sound ended on those videos. Sound was very low. All right. I did turn it down quite a bit. It was just traffic noise, just as atmosphere. So the videos were silent, but thanks, Heather Hesterman. Okay, the second video I'd like to show you has also a little bit in common with the work that I'm making for Experimenta. So as I was saying, what I did for a decade or so was make performance works. They're about the nature of subjectivity, and they're part of that long tradition of video artwork that deals with subjectivity, that deals with that encounter of the self, of encounter with the self as other through technology. That's continued to be an important part of video art and continues today into the selfie and selfie art that's been such an important part of some feminist work in the last 10 years or so. When I was working in installation in galleries, as a way to locate the work in the physical space of the gallery and complicate screen space as part of a kind of an investigation of screen space and what it does. And the so I started to incorporate the space of the gallery in the work, and increasingly I started to shoot the work actually on site during the setup period of the show. And that led, the works became less insular, and I actually then started to research a little bit about where the show was. So I'd start to learn a little bit about the history of the place where the gallery was. And slowly the work went from being this insular kind of existential work around the construction of subjectivity into more outward looking work that dealt with larger histories, larger social histories, and then increasingly started to look at histories of land use. And then I started to more look at the relationship between geography and land use. And so the entanglement of natural history and human history, social history, started to be real fascination. So that's really at its peak, I suppose, in this work from 2017. This was part of Climart 2017. So I'll show that work now. Now I'm going to show it silent, and I'm going to read a text to you that is part of the work. I'm going to read it a little bit more quickly than it's usually timed precisely for the 9 minutes of the work, but I'm going to go a bit quicker so we can make up a little bit of time, and I won't read the whole thing. I'm just going to give you a bit of an idea of it, okay? All right, back over here, share screen. I want that one. You should have it now. Turn it all the way down. Play.
Try sharing screen again, Dom.
Okay. You got it, Nikki?
Looks good.
Okay. The bay frames the sea. The sea rises up to meet the land. There's a scale bay on mainland in Orkney, just off the northern tip of Scotland. These waves washing in from the North Sea have pushed this edge back and forth for millennia. In the 19th century, when every gentleman of leisure displayed scientific curiosities in the drawing room, a big tide revealed a Neolithic stone village, previously covered by dunes, right at the feet of the Laird of Scale Manor, an amateur archaeologist. Amongst his collection, too, were Captain Cook's dishes, traded when Resolution and Discovery called in at Orkney on their return from Cook's ill-fated third voyage. Like Cook's voyages, the village was not a discovery so much as a laying claim, for rectangular barrows on the Downs of Scale were reported in travellers' accounts written in 1767, and the village stood first upon this land some 5,000 years ago, when it was some distance from the sea, with good grazing and farming to be had between Scale Loch and the Strand. Now it is daily threatened by the sea that nibbles at its footings, just metres from the tide. The grasses reach to bind the sand in place, a million centuries holding position and stretching to claim a salient where none can be found. A woven remnant of cyclone fencing begins to assimilate, taking its cue from the grasses. The tide's age-long tussle with humans can be read in the layers of anthropic stone, sandwiched in the dune, topped by dry stone walls, the remains of the most recently contested site, an old mill. The mill harnessed the water that flowed in the waterway, the Buin, from Scaleloch to the bay, water that is now its undoing. An entire spool of packing strap, fallen from a passing ship, has reordered itself into a fisherman's nightmare, a skein with ends lost, quivering at the shoreline. Submarine nets have been recycled and deployed in a rearguard action to maintain the foundations of the mill. The submarine nets are left over from World War II, when they worked to keep U-boats out of the nooks and crannies that led to Scapa Flow, which waters sheltered British fleets from the North Sea in both world wars, as they have done back into prehistory. Here it fights to keep the stone and the sea apart, or at least on separate sides of a line, with order in, disorder out, so that one narrative may prevail over another and stay fixed here at the edge. In its efforts, the submarine net captures more nets, those of the fishing fleets who still work the North Sea. Striving to impose order built into its form again and again, it binds all it meets to its purpose, reorganizing it in its own image. Adrift from its purpose, it is caught up or caught upon. It becomes that which it seeks to contain. It drifts from its orderly grid into the tangled chaos of the non-human just beyond the doorstep. The villagers of Skara too fought disorder on their doorstep, as their village was consumed by the encroaching tides of sand and their own rubbish, eventually driven from their homes by waves of entropy, by a tide covered, by a tide revealed, by a tide now cast asunder. Okay, so we'll leave that one there. So you can see on that beach, there were all these wonderful things that all started to resemble each other, both the human-made and the naturally occurring, all there, all tangled in amongst each other, all had this quality of holding. I just thought it quite poetic, and it struck me as reminiscent of the Deleuzean idea that what art does is, well, what humanity does is fence out chaos. Yeah, we make the frame. The first thing we do is make a home, Yeah, and so I was talking about these little homes they make, these little stone homes that they made there, this Neolithic village to keep out the wilds, and this Deleuzian idea of keeping out chaos, yeah, and this constant tussle between chaos and order, and the delightful idea that what the thing about art is that it brings a little bit of chaos into the world. You know, it nibbles away at the edge, and its liveliness, its wonderful dynamism, its excitement is because it brings a little bit of chaos with it. And then finally, I don't know where the time has gone, but finally, I'd like to show you this preview I've made of the work I'm creating for First Forms. This work has a dub soundtrack. So for those of you who are listening on a phone or through your computer speakers, it won't sound so good. It will sound best on headphones or a decent set of speakers, though I don't expect any of us are listening through speakers. The reason it's got a dub soundtrack is that this is about the very origins of life. And so I was thinking about foundations, about the basis, about bass. And so dub is a music of bass, and it's also a religious music. It's a cosmological music. So this is a cosmology. This is a story of beginning times. And so I think I better just show it. It goes for a little over 3.5 minutes. Hopefully I've got that volume level right. You let me know, Nicky. Come on, share screen. Is that okay, Nicky?
I think turn it up.
Cool.
Did you hit share audio?
Is it not? Can you not hear it?
No sound for other people.
Okay, all right, let's try again. Share screen.
And tick the share audio tick boxes.
All right, let's try again. Sorry, folks.
Yep, that sounds great.
Passing of electrons from a larger molecule to another smaller one. We breathe in oxygen and out comes carbon dioxide and water, and so it goes round. The greatest source of electrons on Earth is water. We do not know where life began. We still chase the long tail. Darwin wrote to a friend, "But if, and oh what a big if, we could conceive in some warm little pond with all sorts of ammonia and phosphoric salts, light, heat, electricity, etc." As with so many things, his intuitions were very close to what we know to be true. the Earth formed gravitationally, spinning up out of the dust and gas of the Big Bang to settle in its orbit around the Sun 4.5 billion years ago. There was no water on it. All of that came, we think, we wonder, we ponder, from ice on meteors colliding with us to form our great oceans. And in those salty ponds, somewhere close to 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, the great engine of life began to turn. The oldest evidence we have for it was found in the Pilbara. It is a stromatolite, 3.5 to 4 billion years old. I have held it in my hand. It looks like an iron-rich stone. From this, all things come. These are stromatolites. The little creatures that make them, layer by micromillimeter layer, are microbes. They still form the vast bulk of all life on Earth. It is they who turned the water of the primordial oceans into oxygen and sugar. We breathe that oxygen, and we burn that sugar in our machines.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Dom. Now, if you stay on the camera, I'll invite Fiona back on. We've got a little bit of time for some questions. So if people who are watching this want to ask some questions, just type it into the chat. But I'm going to kick it off. I want to ask both of you, given geographic location is so central to your work, I'm curious to see how you go about what gets you interested in a particular site, and what's your process for selecting a site that might become a subject of your artwork?
You're going to go first, Fee?
I think sight's really interesting, Jonathan, and I've always, I've just been talking with a friend today about how sight is often this exotic other, but I'm just engaging with notions of the transcorporeal, which locates everything within and through us, and we are always of our sight. So I'm starting to think about sight really differently in my approach, particularly the Western treatment plant, because literally I live in Flemington. I flush the toilet and I'm at the treatment plant. When I'm physically there on site, there are traces of my being and the multi-species site that I already am. So it's really from those kind of human essentialist views of the world from above or from a different perspective, I think I'm thinking through sight in terms of a more embedded perspective. Okay.
Dom?
Well, so as I tried to lay out a little bit, human social history and so-called natural history are not only intertwined, they're the same thing. So histories of places are histories of people. We, without getting into some, I'm not being spiritual, I'm not against spiritual ideas at all, but we are of place, we're made by places, yeah? So I think they shape everything about the way humans are. So I'm very interested in them. That's, I think my work is about places. So the site dictates everything about my projects. Yeah, that sets the parameters for what the work is. That sets the boundaries, yeah. And I then operate within that.
Does that mean you choose the site first in terms of your artistic process, and then you see what that site reveals within the framework that you've just talked about, you know, the broader framework? And is that the same for you, Fiona? Like you choose the site first and then unpack it, or is it the other way around?
I think I always engage with site first. I think it tells us, it speaks of who we are and what we're doing. So site is really important in the way I work. I have a site-specific practice, absolutely.
Yeah.
I tend to say, you know, and not to split hairs, but site responsive, you know, site specific, absolutely. And then very occasionally I get curated into something, and so I try and make something about the place. So in 2015, I was curated, for example, into the Gurgis Art Prize. And so I made a work about Canadian Creek there in Ballarat, about a waterway there. And I could tell the story about that. But so yeah, that's the other way it goes, which is not quite the same thing as choosing a site, but having a site choose me, I suppose. But that's always important, you know. So then if someone gives me a gig, then I do a bunch of research. This one's a bit different, obviously, not only in that your show is multi-site, but that I responded to the curatorial brief. I had this is like a deep, it's always about the story as well with me. I suppose I'm very interested in Doreen Massey's idea that places are made by stories. You know, that's what a place is, that's how it differs from a set of coordinates. You know, it's constructed out of the stories we tell about it, the narratives that attend it.
And do you try and reveal the stories that are already there, or do you want to add to the stories through your work, or is it both?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think in the instance of the first work I showed today, that was very much responding to the human history of the site, that then translated. There was a moment in that work actually when I was standing outside the water tower, and I became acutely aware of the response of it was crows and what seemed to be Jurassic-sized mosquitoes. Like there was just this life responding to the vibration and the sound. So the site then led me into this whole other thing about, well, what else, what occurs in nature that glows and that uses vibration in that process of glowing. And there's a great story about Werribee actually, and the state research farm having buried cows with tritium that had been fed tritium at some point. Mm-hmm. And tritium is an isotope that gives off a very dull glow, so would only ever probably be seen buried under the ground. That's how the best kind of light you would see it in, but that really enamored me. So the story of sight then generates a whole proliferation of other things and made me think through the future, how we approach the future, what is the future if we're already radioactive. So a whole range of things bubble up and emerge in relation to the site. And it's whether you're telling using a set of those kind of flight lines to create a story, or whether you're going somewhere else and being driven by a story.
Okay.
I think our memories are so very short, Jonathan, that I don't have any need to make up any new stories at all. You know, there's no end of really interesting histories all around us all the time, and so few people know them that you can look, you know, you can look quite impressive by doing a bit of research. You know, you can find quite fascinating stories just by doing a bit of research. Yeah.
Fantastic. Look, thank you so much for both of your presentations today. Really wonderful. Looking forward to seeing both works in their final form. as I'm sure many of the people that have joined us today will be as well.
Can I answer? Sarah Walker's grabbed it for me. Yeah, it's okay.
What was it?
Monica had a question. She thought I said Lervian, so obviously my pronunciation's terrible, but it was indeed Deleuzian. Thank you very much, Sarah Walker. Yeah.
Well, thanks for the attendees for sorting that one out for us.
And the best book, Art, Chaos, Territory by Elizabeth Gross would be the book to read by the very eminent Australian philosopher Elizabeth Gross, if you're interested in that idea, Monica.
Fantastic.
Thanks. Sorry, Jonathan.
No, that's very important to get that clear. Thank you again to both of you. And as I say, looking forward to seeing the works when in their final form.
Thanks for having us, Jonathan and Nicky.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Nicky. Thank you, Jonathan.
See you later.